What if the Messiah you've been waiting for has already come, but in a way you never expected? For centuries, the Jewish people have held fast to the promise of a deliverer, a figure foretold in their sacred scriptures to redeem Israel and transform the world. Yet some Jews, known as Messianic Jews, believe that this promise was fulfilled in a man named Yeshua, or Jesus, a figure most of their kin have not embraced. This raises a question that pulses with intrigue. Why would a people steeped in the traditions of the Torah and the prophets turn to a Messiah who seems to stand outside their expectations? Today we're diving into the heart of this mystery, uncovering the real reasons Messianic Jews accepted Jesus as their Savior. This is not just a story of belief, it's a saga of identity, resilience, and the courage to stand at the crossroads of two worlds. We'll uncover how Messianic Jews navigate their Jewish heritage while embracing a figure who has divided communities for millennia. From the ancient prophecies they see fulfilled in Jesus to the modern communities that sustain their faith, this exploration will reveal a perspective that bridges the past and present, challenging what you thought you knew about faith and belonging. By the end of this video, you'll discover a hidden truth about the Bible and the Jewish story that might just reshape how you see the Messiah. Whether you come from a Jewish background, a Christian one, or are simply curious about the intersections of faith, this deep dive promises insights that are as surprising as they are profound. If you're ready to unravel this enigma, hit that like button to show your support and subscribe to join us on this journey through faith, history, and the Bible. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. For over 2 millennia, the question of why some Jews embraced Jesus as the Messiah has lingered like a quiet echo in the corridors of history. To understand the reasons behind the rise of Messianic Judaism, we must first step back into the turbulent world of first-century Judea and trace the threads that wove this unique movement into existence. This is not just a story of theology, it's a tale of a people caught in the crucible of oppression, yearning for redemption, and finding hope in an unexpected figure. The Jewish people of the first century lived in a crucible of turmoil, their homeland a shadow of its former glory. Judea, the sacred land promised to Abraham's descendants, was under the heel of the Roman Empire. The Romans, with their legions and tax collectors, imposed a suffocating control, demanding tribute that bled families dry and stationing soldiers in sacred cities like Jerusalem. Governors like Pontius Pilate ruled with an iron hand, often clashing with Jewish sensibilities, such as when Pilate brought Roman standards bearing imperial images into the Holy City, sparking outrage among the Jews who saw such acts as idolatry. This was not just political subjugation, it was a spiritual wound, a reminder that God's chosen people were no longer free in the land of their covenant. Centuries of foreign domination had shaped the Jewish psyche. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, the Greek conquest under Alexander the Great, and the harsh Seleucid rule that led to the Maccabean revolt all fueled a collective yearning for redemption. By Jesus' time, the Jewish people turned to their scriptures for solace, finding hope in prophecies of a Messiah, a descendant of King David who would break the yoke of oppression, Isaiah 9:4, and restore Israel's sovereignty. Isaiah's vision of a leader who would bring everlasting peace, Isaiah 9:7, and Ezekiel's promise of a reunited Israel, Ezekiel 37:22, were not mere words. They were lifelines, sustaining a people through centuries of suffering. Yet the Jewish community was a tapestry of competing visions. The Pharisees, guardians of the Torah, believed that meticulous observance of God's law, including oral traditions, would hasten the Messiah's arrival. The Sadducees, aristocratic and tied to the temple, prioritized ritual purity and political stability, often aligning with Rome to preserve their influence. The Zealots, fueled by righteous anger, dreamed of a Messiah who would wield a sword, leading a rebellion to cast off Roman chains. The Essenes, retreating to desert communities like Qumran, awaited a cosmic battle where God's anointed would triumph. This diversity meant that any claimant to the Messianic title would face scrutiny from multiple angles. When Jesus emerged, his message would either ignite hope or provoke rejection, depending on where one stood in this fractured landscape. The question that haunts us is, Why did some Jews, against all odds, see in him the answer to their prayers? Into this volatile world came Jesus of Nazareth, a figure who seemed an unlikely candidate for the Messianic mantle. He was no warrior king riding a chariot, no scion of a noble house, but a humble teacher from a backwater village. Yet his words carried a power that resonated deeply with those who heard him. Jesus preached a kingdom that transcended earthly politics, declaring, "The kingdom of God is within you." Luke 17:21. His teachings emphasized love for God and neighbor, forgiveness of sins, and a radical call to humility, ideas that clashed with the prevailing expectation of a Messiah who would crush Israel's enemies. What made Jesus' message so compelling to some Jews was its rootedness in their own scriptures, coupled with a vision that spoke to the marginalized. When he stood in a synagogue and read from Isaiah, proclaiming, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor," Luke 4:18, he was claiming a messianic role, but not in the way many expected. His miracles, giving sight to the blind, healing the lame, even raising the dead, echoed prophecies like Isaiah 35 verse 5 through 6, which foretold a time when the lame will leap like a deer. For those who followed him, these acts were signs that God was moving in history, fulfilling the promises of old. Jesus' appeal was strongest among society's outcasts. Fishermen like Simon Peter, despised tax collectors like Levi, and women like Mary Magdalene found in him a teacher who saw their worth. His parables, drawn from everyday life, sowing seeds, tending vineyards, spoke to the common people in a language they understood. Yet his message also challenged the status quo. When he said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth," Matthew 5:5, he was redefining power in a way that baffled those who longed for a military liberator. Here's a subtle surprise. Jesus' earliest followers, all Jews, did not see themselves as breaking with their faith. They continued to pray in the temple, observe Jewish festivals, and uphold the Torah, believing Jesus was the Messiah who would complete, not abolish, their covenant with God. This raises a pivotal question. If their faith was so deeply Jewish, how did it evolve into a distinct movement? To trace the roots of modern Messianic Judaism, we must leap forward through centuries of history where the Jewish followers of Jesus faced a complex and often painful journey. In the decades after Jesus' death, his movement grew among both Jews and Gentiles, but tensions arose. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE by the Romans shattered Jewish life, and as Christianity spread through the Gentile world, it began to diverge from its Jewish origins. By the 4th century, when Emperor Constantine made Christianity the religion of Rome, Jewish believers in Jesus were caught in a bind. They faced pressure to abandon Jewish practices like circumcision and Sabbath observance, and many were marginalized within the increasingly Gentile church. Over time, the Jewishness of Jesus' movement faded, replaced by a Christianity that felt foreign to many Jews. Yet the spark of a Jewish Messiah endured. The modern Messianic Jewish movement began to take shape in the 19th century, a period of profound upheaval for Jewish communities. In Eastern Europe, pogroms, violent anti-Jewish riots, drove millions to flee, while in Western Europe, the Enlightenment challenged traditional religious structures. The rise of Zionism, with its call for a Jewish homeland, stirred questions about identity and faith. Amid this ferment, some Jews began to revisit the figure of Jesus, not as the Christ of European cathedrals, but as a Jewish teacher and potential Messiah. Here's a startling revelation. This resurgence was not primarily the work of Christian missionaries, as one might expect. Instead, it came from Jewish intellectuals and seekers who, poring over the Hebrew Bible, found connections to the claims of the New Testament. Figures like Joseph Rabinowitz in 19th century Russia established communities that blended Jewish worship with faith in Jesus, laying the groundwork for what would become Messianic Judaism. By the 20th century, particularly after the Holocaust's devastation, the movement gained traction in the United States. The 1960s and 1970s, a time of spiritual awakening and countercultural movements, saw the establishment of Messianic synagogues like Beth Messiah in Cincinnati. These communities sang Hebrew prayers, read the Torah, and celebrated Passover, all while proclaiming Jesus, whom they called Yeshua, as the Messiah. This was a movement born not of assimilation, but of a desire to reclaim the Jewishness of their faith. The question that emerges is, what allowed this movement to flourish in a world where Jewish and Christian identities seemed irreconcilable? At the core of Messianic Judaism is a fierce commitment to Jewish identity, a thread that binds its followers to their heritage even as they embrace Jesus. Unlike traditional Christian converts, who might adopt new rituals and abandon Jewish practices, Messianic Jews see their faith as an extension of their covenant with God. They light Shabbat candles, chant the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," Deuteronomy 6:4, and celebrate festivals like Sukkot, viewing these as eternal signs of God's bond with Israel. For them, Jesus is not a departure from this covenant, but its fulfillment, the one who brings the promises of the prophets to life. This commitment is rooted in a profound theological claim that the Messiah was always meant to come from Israel, for Israel. When Jesus said, "Salvation is from the Jews," John 4:22, Messianic Jews hear an affirmation of their role in God's plan. They argue that believing in Jesus does not negate their Jewishness, but deepens it, connecting them to the Messianic hope that has sustained their people through exile and persecution. Yet this stance is fraught with tension. Traditional Jewish communities often view Messianic Judaism as a betrayal, arguing that faith in Jesus' divinity violates the principle of God's indivisible oneness. Some even compare it to historical attempts at forced conversion, a painful echo of medieval crusades and inquisitions. This controversy underscores a critical question. How do Messianic Jews hold fast to their identity in the face of such opposition? For Messianic Jews, the Hebrew Bible is the cornerstone of their belief that Jesus is the Messiah. They approach the Tanakh with a lens that sees Jesus, or Yeshua as they call him, woven into its prophecies, fulfilling promises that traditional Jewish scholars interpret differently. One of the most pivotal texts is Isaiah 53, often called the suffering servant passage. This chapter describes a figure who is despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering. Isaiah 53 verse 3, who bears the sins of many and is pierced for our transgressions. Isaiah 53 verse 5. Messianic Jews argue that this vividly portrays Jesus' life, crucifixion, and redemptive death. They point to the specificity of the language, piercing, suffering, and intercession, as aligning with the New Testament accounts of Jesus' sacrifice, seeing it as a clear prophecy fulfilled in his passion. Another key text is Micah 5:2, which foretells a ruler from Bethlehem, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Messianic Jews connect this to Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, as recorded in Matthew 2:1, arguing that the reference to ancient times hints at a divine or eternal nature. Psalm 22, with its haunting cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Psalm 22:1, is another cornerstone, echoing Jesus' words on the cross, Matthew 27:46. They see the Psalm's descriptions of mockery, pierced hands, and divided garments as uncanny parallels to the crucifixion. Unlike traditional Jewish interpretations, which often view Isaiah 53 as referring to the nation of Israel or a collective figure, Messianic Jews assert that these passages point to an individual Messiah, Jesus, who suffered to redeem humanity. This interpretive approach is not without rigor. Messianic Jews engage deeply with the Hebrew text, often citing the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, to argue that early Jewish scholars saw messianic implications in these passages. They also draw on Daniel 9:26, which speaks of an anointed one who will be cut off before the destruction of the temple, aligning this with Jesus' death before the temple's fall in 70 CE. But what makes their reading so compelling? It's the conviction that these prophecies, scattered across centuries, converge in one person, painting a portrait that Jesus alone matches. The question that burns is, how do they reconcile this bold claim with the traditions of their ancestors? Messianic Jews do not see their belief in Jesus as a rejection of Judaism, but as its natural culmination. They continue to embrace the rhythms of Jewish life, observing the Sabbath, celebrating Passover, reciting the Shema, while infusing these practices with a new layer of meaning. For them, the Torah remains God's eternal word, but Jesus is its living fulfillment. When Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Matthew 5:17. Messianic Jews take this as a mandate. They argue that the Torah's commands, from dietary laws to festival observances, are not nullified but enriched by Jesus' teachings and sacrifice. For example, during Passover, Messianic Jews see the lamb's blood that spared Israel from death, Exodus 12, as a foreshadowing of Jesus, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, John 1:29. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, with its sacrificial system, is understood through Hebrews 9:12, which describes Jesus as the ultimate high priest who offers himself once for all. Yet they continue to fast and pray on Yom Kippur, not as a rejection of Jesus' atonement, but as a way to honor their heritage and seek God's mercy. This dual commitment to Jewish practice and Messianic faith sets them apart from traditional Christians, who might see the Old Covenant as superseded. Messianic Jews insist they are not converting to Christianity, but embracing a fuller expression of their Jewish identity, one that includes the Messiah their scriptures foretold. This reconciliation is not merely symbolic, it's a theological stance rooted in the belief that God's covenant with Israel is irrevocable. They cite Jeremiah 31:31-33, which promises a new covenant written on the heart, arguing that Jesus inaugurated this covenant while preserving Israel's unique calling. This perspective allows them to navigate the tension between continuity and innovation, seeing Jesus as the bridge between the ancient promises and their modern faith. But how do they justify this in the face of traditional Jewish objections? That's where their theological creativity shines, leading us to a surprising insight. One of the most intriguing aspects of Messianic Jewish theology is the claim that their faith represents a return to an earlier, more authentic form of Judaism. They argue that the Judaism of Jesus' time, before the rise of rabbinic tradition in the post-temple era, was more open to diverse Messianic expectations. The Pharisees, Essenes, and others held varying views on the Messiah, and Messianic Jews see their beliefs as aligned with this earlier pluralism. They point to the concept of the memra, Aramaic for word, a term used in ancient Jewish texts like the Targums to describe God's active presence. For Messianic Jews, Jesus is the memra incarnate, the Word made flesh, John 1:14, fulfilling Jewish ideas about God's immanence without violating monotheism. This perspective is a subtle surprise, as it challenges the notion that Messianic Judaism is a Christian imposition. Instead, they frame it as a reclamation of a Jewish worldview that existed before the codification of rabbinic Judaism in the Talmudic period. They argue that the traditional Jewish rejection of Jesus stems from later theological developments, particularly the emphasis on God's absolute transcendence, which made the idea of a divine Messiah seem foreign. By contrast, Messianic Jews see Jesus' claims, such as "I and the Father are one," John 10:30, as compatible with Jewish thought, echoing the mystical intimacy of God's presence in texts like Exodus 33:14, where God promises, "My presence will go with you." This theological creativity allows Messianic Jews to navigate the charge of idolatry often leveled by traditional Jews. They insist that their faith in Jesus does not compromise the Shema's declaration of God's oneness, but reframes it through the lens of Messianic fulfillment. Yet this stance invites scrutiny, as it diverges sharply from the mainstream Jewish understanding of the Messiah. The question that lingers is, how do they address these differences head-on? The theological divide between Messianic Jews and traditional Judaism is profound, rooted in differing expectations of the Messiah. Traditional Jews envision a Messiah who will usher in a tangible global transformation, rebuilding the temple, gathering the exiled tribes of Israel, and establishing universal peace, as foretold in Isaiah 2:4, where nation will not take up sword against nation. Since Jesus' life did not bring these outcomes, the temple was destroyed and the Jewish people faced further dispersion. Most Jews conclude he cannot be the Messiah. Moreover, the concept of a Messiah who dies and returns later, central to Christian and Messianic belief, is absent from traditional Jewish texts, which expect the Messiah to complete his mission in one lifetime. Messianic Jews counter this by embracing a two-stage Messianic vision. They argue that Jesus' first coming fulfilled prophecies of suffering and redemption, as in Isaiah 53, while his second coming will fulfill the promises of global peace and restoration, as in Zechariah 14:9, which declares, "The Lord will be king over the whole earth." They point to Zechariah 12:10, where God says, "They will look on me, the one they have pierced, as evidence of a Messiah who suffers before triumphing." This interpretation allows them to reconcile Jesus' death with messianic expectations, but it remains a point of contention. Traditional Jews view this bifurcated timeline as a later Christian innovation, not grounded in the Tanakh. Another challenge is the question of divinity. Traditional Judaism holds that the Messiah will be a human leader, not divine, and that God's oneness precludes incarnation. Messianic Jews navigate this by emphasizing Jesus' role as the Messiah, not as a separate deity, often avoiding Trinitarian language that might alienate their Jewish roots. Yet passages like John 8:58, where Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," pose a hurdle as they suggest a divine identity that traditional Jews find incompatible with monotheism. This theological rift underscores the boldness of Messianic Jews' stance, as they stand in a liminal space, claiming both their heritage and their Messiah. How do they maintain this balance in a world that often demands they choose one side? In today's globalized world, maintaining Jewish identity is both a sacred calling and a formidable challenge. For centuries, Jews have preserved their distinctiveness through adherence to the Torah, observance of holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah, and a shared sense of history forged in the fires of exile, persecution, and resilience. Yet the modern era, marked by secularism, intermarriage, and cultural assimilation, has tested this identity like never before. In diaspora communities, particularly in places like the United States, many Jews grapple with balancing their heritage with the pressures of a pluralistic society. Some embrace secular identities, while others turn to Zionism or renewed religious observance to anchor their sense of self. For Messianic Jews, the answer lies in a faith that integrates their Jewishness with a belief in Jesus as the Messiah, creating a unique synthesis that both preserves and redefines their identity. Messianic Jews see their faith as a way to breathe new life into their heritage. By celebrating Passover with a focus on Jesus as the Paschal Lamb, or reciting the Shema with an understanding of Jesus' role in God's plan, they infuse traditional practices with messianic meaning. This approach allows them to remain connected to the Jewish story, its covenant, its struggles, its hope, while embracing a figure who, for them, fulfills its deepest promises. They often cite Isaiah 49:6, where God declares that Israel will be a light to the Gentiles, as a mandate not only to preserve their identity, but to share their faith with the world. This dual commitment is a powerful draw, offering a sense of continuity in a world where Jewish identity can feel fragmented. Yet this choice is not without complexity. In a post-Holocaust world, where Jewish survival is a testament to resilience, any deviation from traditional Judaism can feel like a risk. Messianic Jews navigate this by emphasizing their place within the broader Jewish narrative, arguing that their faith in Jesus is not a betrayal but an affirmation of God's unchanging promise to Abraham's descendants. The question that emerges is, how do they maintain this delicate balance when their beliefs place them at odds with their own people? One of the most significant challenges Messianic Jews face is the rejection they encounter from traditional Jewish communities. For many Jews, the belief in Jesus as the Messiah is not merely a theological disagreement, but a profound rupture in the fabric of Jewish identity. Traditional Judaism holds that the Messiah will bring about a visible transformation, rebuilding the temple, restoring Israel, and ushering in global peace, none of which occurred during Jesus' lifetime. Moreover, the historical association of Christianity with anti-Semitic persecution, from medieval pogroms to the Holocaust, makes the idea of a Jewish Christian unthinkable for many. As a result, Messianic Jews are often viewed as outsiders, labeled as Christians in disguise, or even as betrayers of their heritage. This opposition can manifest in stark ways. In some Jewish communities, Messianic Jews are excluded from synagogues, denied participation in communal events, or even shunned by family members who see their faith as a rejection of Judaism. Organizations like Jews for Judaism actively counter Messianic outreach, arguing that it undermines Jewish continuity. A surprising detail is that some traditional Jewish leaders equate Messianic Judaism with historical forced conversions, recalling times when Jews were coerced into baptism under threat of death. This historical trauma casts a long shadow, making the Messianic Jewish claim to Jewish identity a point of contention. Despite this, Messianic Jews persist in asserting their Jewishness. They point to biblical precedents, like the prophet Elijah, who stood alone against prevailing beliefs yet remained faithful to God's call, 1 Kings 19:10. They argue that their faith aligns with the Jewish tradition of questioning and seeking, even when it leads to unpopular conclusions. Some Messianic congregations go so far as to mirror traditional synagogues, using Hebrew liturgy and Torah scrolls to affirm their place within the Jewish world. This resilience raises a critical question. What gives them the strength to endure such opposition and continue proclaiming their dual identity? At the heart of Messianic Judaism's endurance is the strength of its communities, which serve as spiritual and cultural havens for those who embrace Jesus while clinging to their Jewish roots. Messianic synagogues, often called shuls, offer a space where believers can worship in a way that feels authentically Jewish, yet centered on Yeshua. These gatherings blend Hebrew prayers, traditional melodies, and Torah readings with sermons about Jesus' messianic role, creating a worship experience that feels both ancient and new. For many Messianic Jews, these communities provide a sense of belonging that is rare in either traditional Jewish or Christian settings, where their dual identity might be misunderstood or rejected. The appeal of these communities lies in their ability to address the spiritual and cultural needs of their members. Unlike mainstream Christian churches, which may emphasize a break with the Old Testament law, Messianic congregations celebrate the Torah as God's eternal gift. They teach that the commandments, from keeping kosher to honoring the Sabbath, remain relevant, even as Jesus' sacrifice fulfills their redemptive purpose. This perspective resonates with Jews who feel alienated by secularism or traditional Judaism's strictures, but seek a faith that honors their heritage. Psalm 119 and 97. "Oh, how I love your law, I meditate on it all day long," is often invoked to express this devotion to God's word in both its Jewish and Messianic dimensions. Moreover, Messianic communities foster a sense of mission, encouraging members to share their faith as a fulfillment of Israel's calling to be a kingdom of priests. Exodus 19:6. This communal support is crucial in the face of external criticism, offering a space where Messianic Jews can affirm their identity without apology. The question that arises is, how does this sense of community translate into a broader vision for their faith? Beyond community, the decision to accept Jesus as the Messiah is driven by a deep personal conviction that resonates with Messianic Jews on both spiritual and intellectual levels. For many, this conviction arises from a transformative encounter with the New Testament, where they find Jesus' teachings and life aligning with the hopes of the Hebrew Bible. Unlike traditional Christians, who might focus on salvation from sin, Messianic Jews often emphasize Jesus' role as the one who fulfills Israel's covenantal destiny. They see him as the mediator of the new covenant promised in Jeremiah 31:31, which will be not like the covenant I made with their ancestors, but written on the heart. This vision of continuity, where Jesus deepens rather than replaces God's promises, is a powerful motivator. This conviction is also intellectual, rooted in a rigorous engagement with Scripture. Messianic Jews often describe their faith as the result of wrestling with texts like Genesis 49:10, which speaks of a ruler from Judah whose scepter will not depart, or Deuteronomy 18:15, where Moses predicts a prophet like me whom God will raise up. For them, Jesus embodies these roles, king, prophet, and priest, in a way that completes the Jewish story. Yet this conviction comes at a cost. Embracing Jesus often means navigating a delicate balance, where Messianic Jews must defend their Jewishness to traditional Jews and their Messianic faith to Christians. Romans 11:25-26, which speaks of a partial hardening of Israel until all Israel will be saved, is a touchstone, suggesting that their faith is part of a divine plan to unite Jew and Gentile in God's kingdom. This personal conviction is what sustains Messianic Jews through isolation or misunderstanding. It's a faith that offers not just spiritual peace, but a sense of purpose, as they see themselves as living out the Messianic hope of their ancestors. But what does this mean for their place in the broader religious landscape? The story of Messianic Jews is a testament to the power of faith to weave together the threads of heritage and hope. Through their journey, we've seen how they find Jesus in the ancient words of the Hebrew Bible, how they reconcile their Jewish identity with a transformative belief, and how they build communities that stand resilient in the face of opposition. Their acceptance of Jesus is not a rejection of their Jewishness, but a bold affirmation of it, a conviction that the Messiah they've awaited has come, fulfilling the promises of their ancestors while pointing to a future of reconciliation. This narrative challenges us to look beyond divisions, to see the shared roots of faith, and to honor the courage it takes to stand in the space between two worlds. What struck you most about the journey of Messianic Jews? Did their story challenge your understanding of faith, identity, or the Bible? Perhaps you've encountered a moment where your own beliefs put you at odds with your community. How did you navigate that? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reflections and keep this conversation alive. Whether you're wrestling with these ideas or simply curious, your perspective adds to the tapestry of understanding we're weaving together. If this exploration opened your eyes to a new perspective, please hit that like button to let us know. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Share this video with a friend who'd be intrigued by the story of Messianic Judaism, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into faith, history, and the Bible. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you're the first to catch our next video. Your support fuels these conversations, and we're grateful to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey into the heart of Messianic Judaism. May you carry forward the wisdom, compassion, and curiosity this story inspires. Until next time, we'll be here, ready to explore another tale that might just shift how you see the world. Stay blessed, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.